Now to Washington, where we find Sarah Gibbens. She is a writer for National Geographic and has been covering the fires extensively. Sarah, thanks so much for joining us. If you could first start off by talking about some of the challenges. You know, we see these pictures, and it is really, I think, for people who have not been in the midst of one of these wildfires, almost impossible to really understand what that is like. What are those challenges for firefighters in battling these wildfires?
In California, I mean, aside from the fire itself, you have these intensely strong winds just fueling the fire. And in addition to that, the terrain also can make it difficult with the hillside and canyons and ridges. It's not as easy to drive through as it might be in a less mountainous area.
Are there environmental factors in California making these fires harder to fight?
Oh, well, California, as I'm sure has been discussed, has been through such severe droughts in so many parts of the state. And that environmental condition is making the ground just sort of ripe for catching fire. There's so much dry brush. Firefighters even call it fuel because of how quickly it catches fire. And that's as the result of so little rainfall and so much extreme drought.
Sarah, in a recent piece for National Geographic, you quote a fire official who describes the current situation as year-round fire season. You know, I'm a meteorologist. I'm also a climate communicator. I study a lot on climate change. What aspects of California have changed over the past few decades? And is it climate change that is really fueling these really aggressive fires over the past couple of years?
Well, I think it's important to distinguish and say that climate change didn't cause these fires. I mean, these fires are caused by things like power lines coming down or accidental sparks going off. But of course, climate change did make California hotter and it made it drier. Typically during this time of year, you would have seen rainfall in parts of the state by now, but that just hasn't been the case this year.
And Sarah, what are some of the long-term environmental consequences of such frequent fires?
I mean, it could definitely change sort of the ecosystem here. You might see different types of plants and brush that grows in this area. Right now, it's just a little too early to tell.
You know, wildlife is something that I think some folks are thinking about as well when you see these areas that are just decimated. How do these fires impact wildlife?
Well, wildlife are really no stranger to wildfires. It's something that they deal with at smaller scales all the time. They'll sort of revert to their natural means of escape, climbing trees, jumping into lakes and rivers, and of course just running away.
Are there any steps that officials could take to ensure the safety of wildlife during these wildfires?
I think just being aware of wildlife whenever they escape these fires will run more likely into human settlements, and that creates more potential for human and wildlife conflict. So it's important to be aware of that potential for coming into more contact with wildlife and respecting those movements.
All right, Sarah Gibbens in Washington for us. Sarah, thank you very much.
Thanks for having me.